How do you go about researching the entire history of women in journalism? Brooke Kroeger talks about her process and how she ended up cutting 40,000 words from her latest book. Hi, it's Angie from HEC Books, where authors get real about their writing and research. Watch until the end when Kroeger talks about her impressive and sometimes infuriating experiences as the only female reporter at an international press bureau.
180 years. How long did this take you to write?
So probably not as long as you might think, because I started it in the early spring of 2019, but I was on leave from the university, though I hadn't retired yet. So I had no other obligations, and I have no young children. I mean, everybody's grown and gone, so there was none of that. So I work maniacally from very, very early in the morning till very late. And so I can do twice what most people can do in a day if I'm at it, and kind of maniacally. And so, and as I said, a lot of this material, the broad outlines of which were not new to me. I worked on undercover reporting. I mean, I've just worked on a lot of this sort of stuff.
Very familiar with the topic, yeah.
Not only that, have worked in news organizations and have taught this for, 22 years. So I was up on new development. I'm just up on stuff. And so that was extremely helpful. What I hadn't done was 1840 to 1880. That was new and kind of fun because I hadn't really dived into that. I was going to leave out the 1860s and 70s because I thought, oh, nobody remembers them. Who cares? They're fabulous. I thought, we have to have those women in here. So I insisted on keeping them. And I only do the years from 2000 to 2022 as an epilogue because I don't think they're ripe for analysis yet. People might wish for that, but it's just too soon. I mean, we really need more perspective to talk about this period. So what I saw that as a trend that I think is valuable to talk about is the intersection of race and gender and how, and that starts all the way back from the abolition reporting of those early reporters. You see it all through how those two issues intersect. Yeah. And I thought that was interesting to pursue also. So there was lots of new stuff, but there was a lot of the core stuff I had a handle on. And then there was COVID.
Yeah. Right.
Which shut down the libraries. So fortunately, from 2019 to March 2020, I had been in the libraries day and night. Well, not day and night because they close at 5 o'clock, but, as long as I could be. And then you couldn't go anywhere. So what was lost, it might have made the book better, who knows, was that ability to turn pages. Because when you turn pages, you find things. So a lot of the really interesting stuff in the parts of the book come out of collections I was looking at before the shutdown.
Within the when you're actually physically
when I say physically
looking,
doing it's things I didn't expect to find, like a few scoops are in there that maybe people won't notice, but there are some scoops. And then you had to ask for things. So it's, will you send me Martha Gellhorn's unpublished autobiography? Will you send me da-da-da? The librarians are the heroes of COVID. I mean, I don't know if people know how much is owed to them. Really, they were just fantastic getting things to you, because they weren't in the office very much either. Right. Nobody could be. So that really probably changed how the time I would have spent on the book also, because by March 2020, I said, I think I better start writing. So then I started doing research and writing at the same time, which I ordinarily do not do.
Yeah.
I would usually wait till I had the research, pretty much framed and then start to write. But it worked. It was fine. It was just different.
As everything was during that time.
As everything was. It feels so funny to talk about now, doesn't it?
It does. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago.
Yeah.
I noticed in your acknowledgments you said that it was way, way too long in the earlier draft. So you had to cut quite a bit?
I cut 37 to 40,000 words.
Holy cow.
Well, a lot of it is in those long endnotes because I couldn't bear to lose all the material. So a lot of it I was putting in there so it would be saved. But the editor felt strongly that the book should be readable. So it's really only 389 pages. It's not, it looks fat, but it's not as fat as it looks. And the notes are really fun if you want to go back there and look at them, because not only do they give the sources, but I give some stories I did not include in the text.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience. So, I mean, you have...
I'm not in this book.
No, you're not in this book.
I'm not in this book.
But as you said, people you've met are in the book. I mean, you worked as a UN correspondent for Newsday, Metro editor for New York Newsday, 11 years with United Press International.
Mostly overseas.
I was going to say, a lot Tel Aviv bureau.
Where I became bureau chief for 4 years. I was bureau chief for 3 of the 4. Then they sent me back to London when the company was falling apart. This is when women get opportunity. I was 33 as the chief editor for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. So I had a third of the world at 33. That was pretty good.
So, I mean, throughout your career, you've had to experience some struggles as well as far as being...
It's not until Me Too that I started to try to think back, as people did, to say, okay, did anything ever happen to me? Because there were a lot of men who boosted my career along. It was always men who was in charge. And so 2 episodes come to me, and they're, rather small in the scheme of things, but maybe they speak to what a lot of us have experienced in various ways. So I was in Tel Aviv for 4 years during the Camp David Accords, Sabra and Shatila, the assassination of Sadat, the death of Moshe Dayan. I mean, huge stories. It's just every day was news and front page news so often. And when I left, I was the only woman in the Tel Aviv press corps. Jerusalem had some women that were on contract, but I think I was the only full-time, sent from New York correspondent who was not a man. And the ambassador, I'm sure trying to be nice, I guess, the only thing he could say was that they would miss my legs.
To which you responded...
Nothing. I mean, I was dumbstruck.
What do you say
There was nothing
to that?
to say. It was just awful. And, maybe he meant I was the only person who wasn't wearing long pants all the time. I mean, maybe, I don't know what he meant, but that's all he had. And I thought...
all the coverage,
Yeah, that's all he had. And then the other thing that happened also in Tel Aviv, my predecessor, when I came, I had a 3-year-old, and my husband was not coming with us. And so the bureau chief fairly, asks our division chief, the job I took after I left Tel Aviv, but it was another wonderful, actually, division chief. He says, gee, we really like Brooke, but, how is she going to do this? This bureau runs 24/7. She has a kid. I don't know how she could possibly manage this. Even though we love Brooke, blah, 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 like that. So I'm going through the files to find, of course I'm going through the files. And I'm a journalist. Of course I go through the files. And Leon's response, he always wrote 1-sentence responses. It just said, you're not going to have to worry about Brooke. LD, just like that. And I just thought, oh my God, that is so wonderful. I mean, it was the kind of thing you'd like to hear about yourself from someone.
Well, and I'm curious because you have this perspective now, like you have a wonderful perspective. When you look at the state of things now, I mean, you go all the way up until today in the book.
July 22nd, 2022, yeah.
But when
and a little bit of Barbara Walters' death that I just wedged in there. Because it was so late. Yeah, it was really at the end.
With your perspective, when you look at newsrooms today, what is it that you're hopeful for? And then what's something that concerns you?
Well, what we hope is that they survive, because that's the big issue of the moment. The crisis in local news is horrific, and of course that affects women and men. Of course, we see lots of women in big positions now because things are falling apart. There is a correlation there, which is, great for women in one way, but frightening because we kind of know what that means. And so I'm concerned about the ability of legitimate news organizations to survive. That would be my biggest concern, for sure.
And you're hopeful for?
We're hoping that solutions will be found, but we've been at this, 15, 20 years now, and not yet clear. I think the book has a lot of cautionary tales. I think the book is really an advice column for young reporters. Where you're looking at some of these stories and you're going, oh, no, don't do that, don't do that. And some of the women who've gone very high in leadership and what's happened to them are, I think, really interesting cautionary tales. So I thought that was an important thing to include, very much so. Anyway, I just think it has a lot of contemporary resonance that, could make you a little smarter when you go about thinking about building a career.
Thanks for watching. Give a thumbs up if you enjoyed this conversation and get notified when new author conversations come out by clicking subscribe.